So many complications. Bear with me. Okay. Oh, I see some people, kind of. How is everyone?
I'm gonna fix it. Hold on.
We are trying to get everyone signed in. I see Louis. I feel like that old show. I see Louisa, Meg, Alistair, Ben, and Hassan. Now I'm starting to see your lovely faces. How is everyone?
Hello.
Okay, I'm gonna go in here.
And Meg, thank you so much for meeting with my friend Brandon. He said
It was
a
wonderful to meet him.
Yes, good.
Actually, he's on my list today to follow up with. I was out of town over the weekend, and so everything from Friday is still sitting on my to-do list.
Okay. Well, I feel like I feel you.
Yeah, it's one of those things.
Yes, but yeah, hopefully you'll keep him around for a little bit.
I hope so.
Yeah.
We can't keep him around on the space or aviation or any sector specific, but hopefully on everything else we can keep him around.
I think he's a good add to any community, so that's always good. I think that's Eric at that 505. I don't get to see Eric's face, but is that you,
I
Eric?
might be facially involved in a little bit, but right now it's just phone. Thanks.
Okay. Well, that's good. So we'll add you to the list, and I'm recording so everybody knows we're recording this for all the people who couldn't be here. We will be sharing this information, all the calls for people that haven't been able to attend, and anybody who wants to look back. So this is all shared in posterity. Let's see. I've got Hassan, I don't see you. I usually see you, but I don't see you right now. And Ben and Alistair, and I was waiting for Norris. Norris is on the way to the state capitol. For those of you who don't know, hi Hassan. So Norris Krieger is usually with us on these quantified methods calls, but he's got a meeting with the lieutenant governor, so we will wish him well for doing that. And in the interest of time and everything, what I'm going to do is have you all introduce yourself. So that, oh, there's Eric's lovely face. Introduce yourself and share a challenge that you have around data and quantified methods. So think about that for a minute. I'm sorry? I missed something. Okay. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Cecilia Wessinger. I am your air traffic controller support person to help you to do the work that you do so well in moving this effort forward. And the biggest challenge that I have in this regard is how to share all of your surveys. It's a really hard one. So with that, I'm going to tag Meg and have you share yours.
Yeah, I'm Meg Stoyer. I'm based out of Minneapolis, St. Paul in Minnesota. I work for a coalition of partners called Forge North, and our biggest struggle is getting everyone on the same page around what we should measure. So that's the work we're doing currently, to just say there's a lot of things to measure, and in your personal life or in your organizational role, you might have things that are important, but we're trying to look at what's important to our community. So that's been our biggest struggle to date. And I will go to Louisa.
Awesome. Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm Louisa Shepard. I'm the Director of Collective Impact at Epicenter in Memphis. We're an entrepreneurship hub center. And I would say that my most challenging challenge is blending data from multiple sources. I find that it's challenging when maybe like one source might say like jobs created versus jobs retained, and everybody is measuring things, but they're measuring them in different ways. And we are, at my role is to talk about the collective impact. So when I have data that has been measured by different units, but essentially is attempting to talk about the same thing, that's my biggest challenge, is just blending data from different sources. I'm sure there are others that I can think of, but we could go on all day. Okay, I will popcorn to Eric.
Excellent. Hi. Yeah, good to see you folks. Let's see. I think in terms of, so Eric Renswickmore, I work for City of Albuquerque with both technology and innovation, but also economic development and sort of community builder locally. Let's see, in terms of, sorry, getting another call. In terms of the challenges right now, I think there's an appreciation among different ecosystem players for the need for data, but we haven't quite gotten to a point where we're sort of in alignment about that. So it's kind of some of the fundamental issues that I think this group is facing as far as, you know, what's our common nomenclature? Is there a roadmap for us all working together? So, you know, we're on the path, but we can use some tools and some guidance and some other examples to help us move forward. Oh, and I'll go to Meg. Oh, Meg, you already talked. How about Hassan?
Hi, Hassan Bazri. I work out of Detroit. I don't think I'm going to say anything new that hasn't been said on the call, which is actually kind of a good thing that we're all experiencing similar challenges. I think for me, it's agreement between different folks in the ecosystem on what data to collect. Also having a uniform system across the ecosystem to collect data. And similar to what Louisa said, I think sometimes there are people that are collecting the same data but may call it different things. So having also agreement on what we're calling the data that we collect. And I will go over to Ben.
Okay, Ben, you're up. Can you hear us, Ben?
He looks like he's on his phone. He could be muted.
Okay.
Ben, you may be muted.
I don't know. Let's try Alistair while we're waiting for Ben.
Okay, I don't have a video on the computer I'm using, but my people I know tell me I have a good face for radio.
Well, we can hear you okay.
I think my main challenge, or biggest challenge, is in using interviews or similar techniques to collect qualitative data, which then maybe can be converted into something numerical so you can develop a metric from those measurements, as we expect metrics to be some sort of a number or not to exceed or not to be less than. So to me, that's the main challenge.
Okay, that's a very interesting perspective, and thank you for sharing all the information that you do on the Slack channel. So I was going to invite you to move some of that discussion over to the channel for quantified method so that we can kind of retain a lot of those sources together, if that would be possible.
Sure, I'll put it anywhere you want me to.
Okay, we're going to try to keep the general discussion for general information, and then the more specific information for those specific channels. So okay. So that we have a repository of information, that would be great.
Yeah, no problem at all. So there is I I don't remember the separate channel for quantitative methods, is there?
Yes.
Okay.
So there are 7 goal channels, each one, and I'll be sure to include you in that. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, we have Slack, and inside each of the Slack channel, inside Slack are each of the 7 goals that are represented, as well as storytelling, because it's kind of infused in everything. So as far as storytelling in regard to this particular goal, we'd probably focus on case studies as a good measure, and how to tell our stories. So Ben, are you ready to join us?
Yeah.
And okay, great.
Yeah, hi everyone. Ben Johnson with BioSTL. My apologies, I'm away from the office today, and so I don't have the camera, and I also don't know how to unmute my phone, evidently. So sorry about that. What's the old adage? Long-time listener, first-time caller here. I have done a little bit more in the inclusion goal work group. First time really engaging here. We're fortunate to have a grant from Kauffman from their Market Gaps inclusion area to fund something called the St. Louis Equity and Entrepreneurship Collective, not dissimilar to what Louisa described as collective impact in Memphis. We are working to do that with an equity lens here in St. Louis and really struggling on the data. And so I thought I would call in and try to start participating a little bit more to learn from this group. Our challenge, much as this was described by others, is that among many things, the sharing of data, in particular, where organizations have confidentiality agreements with their clients. When they survey data, they say, share your data, share your jobs, your revenue data, et cetera. We as an individual organization won't share that. That then hinders us sharing it at a regional collective ecosystem level. And so we're trying to work out new confidentiality agreements or data share agreements. And as you all well know, probably even better than us, it's just the relatedness even among entrepreneur support organizations or entrepreneurs. As we're growing trust, it's often still a challenge to share data. So appreciate the opportunity to join. Sorry for my fits and starts, and look forward to learning from the group. Thanks.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to share my screen very briefly. I'm sure that most of you have seen this document as it's been shared. This is the quantified methods portion of our updated goal work. So there's revised language in here that defines the goal. And then we identified 3 things to work on, and they all have project briefs. Whoops, that's Andy. So I will stop sharing that. Actually, it's an interesting message. We're working on a couple of tools that will assist you. So that's what he's chiming back in on. So basically, there is common set of crowdsourced metrics. There's a brief behind that. There's a develop a common evidence-based ecosystem building practices, so frameworks and processes. There is a brief behind that, and create repository of evidence-based ecosystem building practices and case studies. So there's a brief behind that, which means we are ahead of the game. What we've also been able to do, and I alluded to it when I sent out the email to everybody, is that we have national resource providers that have agreed to take a look at these initiative briefs as we're working on them, and give us some feedback to move them along. So because they're the people that would put people power or bandwidth or funding behind some of these efforts, it's really a great opportunity to have national resource providers that are going to give us feedback during an RFP process, which is almost unheard of, right? So to let us know what we need to tweak or what we need to help us help them support us. So I'm going to be submitting these briefs. If you could, as a group, take a look at them in the next week or so and add to them. The ESHIP champions, particularly the ones on this call, I'm going to ask you, as you look at these briefs also, we've been working on a simpler method of creating a proposal brief. So trying to take out the important parts and then leave off some of those so that we don't end up with an 8-page document, but more of a 2-page document that somebody can look at. So think of it in your mind as you look at these briefs and figure out what it is that we can do to simplify the process. Because imagine yourself as a new ESHIP attendee, and you go to the ESHIP Summit, and if we were to put this into a brochure or into those handouts that when you go to a summit, they give you the handouts of what's going to take place, the schedule and all of those things. If we could put these together in that pamphlet, what would it need to look like for you to see it and understand it right away? If you've never heard of this ESHIP stuff or don't know what an ecosystem builder is or whatever, that you could actually look at this document and understand what it is we're trying to do. So if you could put that lens on and take a look at it, that would be great. I have a couple of things to throw at you to see what the interest level is for this. I think one of the things that we've discovered as we talk to people is there's a need and a want for things like a research conference that's focused on ecosystem building. And what would that look like? Where all of you who are, I have to ask whether or not it's offensive to call you data geeks. Is that a derogatory term, or is that a term of endearment or empowerment?
Well, I have it on my personal website, so
okay.
I would claim it. We can reclaim geek, but I will defer to what other people have to say about it.
I don't care. Doesn't bother one way or another. It doesn't bother me.
Okay.
I like reclaiming geek. I think that's good.
Yeah, also all about it. Our research team will also be very much about that.
All right. Ben, Hassan?
Yeah, I have no issue with it.
I don't pretend to know anything about data, but I'll gladly be a geek.
Okay. I think that geek is one of those terms that that we've really felt empowered in claiming these days, right? It's like saying, you know what, if I geek out about something, it's that I'm obviously very passionate and know the nuances. So, all right, so we're going to claim the data geek thing. So if we got a conference together of all these data geeks, what would that have to look like? What would be important to include? Is that a benefit for everyone? What does everyone think about that?
I think that initially, just like an initial pass on the idea is something that would be great, and something that is very needed, right? So I'm a very young person in this industry, and like in this profession, and people are always asking me like what to do about it. So obviously not a lot of people have answers to the challenges that we're facing, obviously, because I think they would be asking older people. So I do think that, you know, like when I speak and stuff, it's very well attended. And I'm giving surface level information, and people are finding it very valuable. So to have a little bit more depth of thought leadership, I believe is something that'd be very valuable for different ecosystem building organizations, just because I think that we're at a time in our industry where a lot of ideas have been funded, but if we're not able to, as a whole, like all across the nation, begin to be putting some actual factual foundations under the big bets and the big ideas that have been made to fund this work, it's going to be a problem. So that's just my opinion about it. I think it would be valuable.
Yeah, I would agree with Louisa. I think it's very important to have depth. Louisa, you use that word. It mustn't be just something that's surface, again, to use your term. Must have depth, research depth to it, even if not everyone understands it, but it needs to challenge people.
Right.
To challenge people, it's got to have real depth.
Right. And for these types of organizations to continue to be sustainable, we cannot continue to like have very, what do we call it, like BS data or vanity metrics. A lot of the times it's difficult because the work that we do, we're building companies that they don't necessarily have proven track records, or we're trying to develop an ecosystem that is very burgeoning. And so even the types of companies that we're working to develop, the metrics that they have are not like normal economic development metrics, which is a reason why I think that we have sometimes challenges quantifying the work that we do, because a lot of economic development metrics are based in jobs created, but startups may not have jobs that are created for a while, or they may not be profitable for a while, but there's still some other sort of impacts that if you guys are going to be at MBIA, I'm talking about this, so you should come to my but yeah, like it's very difficult. So I say all that to say that if we had a thing that was surrounding just this, personally it would be valuable to me because it's what I do every day, but I do believe that many other organizations are struggling with it, and they don't have a person like me on their team, or like just a data person on their team. So it could be even bigger of a struggle for a lot of organizations that are spending their time focusing on the programming.
So I'm curious to hear from Ben and Eric too, because I want to see if Ben sees that similarly in his environment, and then Meg also in yours, because it is how you live and die by those numbers, right? As far as an organization goes.
Yeah. So go ahead, Ben.
No, please go ahead, Eric.
So I was going to say, yeah, I think that's it's definitely important and useful for us. One thing, and I talked a little bit with Rob Williams about this maybe a few weeks ago with SourceLink. And I'll just say, on the one hand, I love the idea of getting everybody together physically, but given that we've got, the ESHIP Summit in a few months, it might be something that we could do some kind of virtual meetup. That also gives an opportunity to invite in other people from town that might not be bought into going to ESHIP or NVIA or something else, but they would definitely, I think, find it valuable. So there's kind of like an on-ramp to getting them involved. So I think there's sort of a draft-ish version where we have some important conversations online that build towards something larger that's in person.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I was just all of the prior comments resonate with me. I think I liked Louisa. Would you use vanity metrics? Was that the term?
Right.
I like that one. I don't know if I'd ever heard that before. We as an organization, I think, are very guilty of that. In part because we're hung up in, as you described, sort of the traditional measures of innovation, entrepreneurship, economic development work, and even with those traditional measures, certainly myself and I think our entire team, and I think across our ecosystem, we're not data geeks, and we know we work a lot with scientists in medical and plant sciences, and so we pretend to understand the rigors of a real data-driven research analysis, but we don't live it or practice it. And so I think as sort of blending together with what was described before and what Eric described, I think for those of us who don't have a propensity toward really understanding the rigor with which data could bring to this, providing those sort of incremental layperson opportunities, whether it's through some of the tools and what was described earlier, or some of the draft materials for the first-timer ESHIP kinds of folks, and then building toward the in-person. I think was it Alistair who described, I think correctly, in that kind of setting, I think we want to set a really high bar for the rigor with which we describe research and we describe data. And we've got to provide a path, at that level of rigor for folks who just don't get it, candidly, and I can just speak for myself in that. So I'm not sure if that's clear in synthesizing anything, but just sort of cards on the table of what I and we are wrestling with as we kind of come to the table today of, really as much as anything listening in. But to the extent that I'm a case study for the broader ESHIP community, happy to help think through it further.
So Meg, what are you seeing in your sector?
Let me unmute myself here. We're seeing a lot of the same things. And so we're really lucky here at Greater MSP to have a research team of 3 people that are data geeks, but lean very traditionally into those economic development metrics that we've seen sort of tell the narrative for a long time. And so it's been great for those researchers to start talking with our coalition of partners to say what might we need to be tracking, or what narrative might we need or can we tell with the data that they're collecting. And so we're blessed with having that rigor and depth that they provide, but then having our partners to say, this is what we need, or this would be what would resonate with our groups or our communities. And so we've started to do that. One great example is with the angel investment tax credit, to say we've always used job numbers. It's startups within their first five years. And so jobs numbers probably after 5 years would be better and more indicative of the growth that our Congress people want to see. So we've started to measure contract positions, and so jobs alongside contract positions, and sort of saying we might not be able to get our legislators or get other groups away from the jobs number in general, but how do we weave a different narrative around jobs to have folks understanding that that traditional job number might not be indicative of the actual growth we're seeing in the regions. So I think mirroring a lot of what folks say, and we're in a very unique situation that we have the research depth to back up what the community wants. We're just at that point now where we have to figure out what are those key metrics we need to be measuring, and what can we sort of come together around to both crowdsource from the community in terms of data, and then have our research team working on collecting.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because what people want measured is what they're used to hearing. So it's really important to hit that note where you say, okay, so jobs is the title, right? And then we talk about these are employed people, and that may not equate to jobs specifically like we understand it in the traditional sense. One of the things that I've tried to embrace in the conversations that I've had, particularly around communities and ecosystem building, is that we have a tendency as entrepreneurs and ecosystem builders to put, I don't want to say a negative lens, but it is a negative lens to talk about traditional economic development as a model of what's old and archaic, and this new thing that we're doing, this entrepreneur, disruptor, innovator lens as we're the new thing, and if you're not doing the new thing and you're doing the old thing, that's bad, that's old, and I think what we're trying to embrace is the inclusive language of saying, this is the evolution of economic development. This is just a slightly different version, and it's evolving into this, as opposed to your old and out of date kind of thing. So I think that's because as economic development people, people in chambers of commerce, policymakers see themselves as ecosystem builders, that's one less battle we have to fight than to go about it saying, you know, it's us against them kind of thing. So so I think that's really important. And maybe part of the things that you have to do in person is getting those people in the room, right? The people that are having to answer for the jobs, the economic development, the whatever we spend our tax dollars on, that kind of thing, to ask them, how can we help you by using this information so that we can help each other, right? To show that entrepreneurship is a job maker and not taking things away from traditional things. Does that make sense? And I think that that some of the really important things are having people like Eric and Louise is a great example of a data translator. I feel like you've got such an incredibly unique role in that you can take this information and say it in a way that makes sense for other people to hear that aren't familiar. And I think that's really important. And Norris will be the first to say, you know, Norris can go on all day long about data and metrics, but sometimes it's that language that we need to be able to translate to so that other people can understand. Eric works in government, so government numbers have to fit in a box. Fortunately, unfortunately, so maybe that's having somebody like Eric to be able to point out, okay, so this is actually what we're looking for. How can we fit that? So, so does that? I feel like there's part of that that's kind of missing when we talk about common set of crowdsourced metrics. We look at common sense set of crowdsourced metrics in the language that we're familiar with.
Yes.
Strong, violent agreement. I think there are two things that I think about. There's a couple audiences to consider. I think first of all, getting the real good data geek folks in the room who will respect and expect kind of a high level of rigor. I think that's probably the core audience, because we need those people to have that discussion. I think to the extent that they're interested, and I think in general there are, with potential stakeholders and folks who fund this kind of research and make policy decisions based on it, I think it's important to be able to bring them in at some point. I don't know that that's at the very beginning. I think that it might be a little bit, a little ways further down the road, not very far, but a little further.
I think, Celia, to your point, I think it's really important actually to break down the conversation into terms that are understandable, because there are a lot of people that are collecting data that probably don't consider themselves data geeks, that don't know how to interpret the data that they have. And I think a lot of this data is not being used because those people are not plugged in to the traditional system. Can you hear me?
Just go like this with your...
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, persistent. Thank you. So to Celia's point, I think it's important to kind of break down the language into easily understandable terms, because there are people that are collecting data that might not know how to translate that data or how to use it. And I think that's very valuable, because that data is sitting somewhere, and I don't think it's plugged into this network or this system. So bringing some of those people in so that they're able to understand what the data is that they're collecting and how it can be useful, I think could have some value.
Cecilia, you're muted.
Sorry, and thank you. To Hassan's point, there is data that's probably sitting there that people may not feel like there's traction with, because nobody's paid attention, but maybe it's because they don't quite understand what's going on, or things that are measured in ways that like Louisa said before, it's not translated. Alistair, you had something that you wanted to add?
Yes, I think there may be a difficulty in using the term common sense metrics, as Louisa, as you point out in the preamble section to goal number 5, the systems we're dealing with are complex, both technically and from our own experience. And so in an ecosystem, the metrics that we'll come up with may not actually be, at least initially, common sense. They may seem to be strange. And whereas we can measure things like jobs, that's pretty much common sense. You can count something, although how you do it is kind of tricky. But my feeling is the metrics we're going to come up with for ecosystems, at least some of them, will not really be common sense to most people until you really dig down and think about it and work at it.
I think the title is Common Set. Are you seeing common sense somewhere?
I thought you were saying common sense. My apologies.
Oh, no. Common set.
Set, okay.
So, sorry about that.
Forget everything I just said.
No. I think it's relevant because I think it's assumed that we're going to measure certain things, and some things are fundamental, but not all things can be translated that way. Just like when we talked about employed versus jobs, right? So jobs, the model of what a job is in traditional senses is very different from our gig economy and remote working and all of that. So.
And some parts of the U.S. Department of Commerce have started using the term uncommon metrics.
Yep, Kaufman does that.
Yes, so I think what we're talking about is uncommon.
Oh, no worries.
They may not be common sense, but also they're not common metrics that you would recognize right away.
So out of these things, so what other things do you see as something that's needed to move these efforts forward? Is there something that we're missing along the way?
Can you, let me make sure I'm not muted. Can you repeat that question?
So we identified 3 things that would be a good place to start, and there's briefs behind them. So the common set of crowdsourced metrics. Yeah. There's the common evidence-based ecosystem building practices. So that's about framework and process. And then there's a repository of evidence-based ecosystem building practices and case studies. I think somewhere along create repository of evidence-based ecosystem practices and case studies may be how we share that with the greater communities. Like, how do we take that information? So we create a repository so that other practitioners can see what's already there, right? I think that's the goal of it, is to create a readily researchable repository. So that if Ben's looking for a measure or statistic or whatnot, and Louisa's already written stuff, that there's a searchable database that we can share. I think that's what goal 5.3 is all about. So what else are we missing?
I feel like
well, I hate to keep hammering on the ecosystem model, but I think really the basis of all of those 3, we have to understand the model that we're working with for ecosystems. And one of the things that tells us, for example, is if we have this repository, it's going to have to be a context-based repository, because measurement that may work in one set of conditions won't work in another. I mean, the classic case, people try to replicate Silicon Valley elsewhere, and the context environment are totally different.
So Alistair, this is Eric. So we need to be explicit about the model that they're sort of referring to when they're developing, their practices.
Yes, I think so. And I seem to be getting an echo here. But yes, and context is a part of the model. So, and in my own practice in a number of countries, I've seen so many times people trying to replicate something and they haven't paid any attention to context, and it usually fails. So you can take measurements, but those measurements mean different things in different contexts, if that makes sense.
So how do we adjust for that?
Oh, I think one way to do it is when you develop, I like things, sort of a measurement, and from the measurement you get the metrics. So the two go together. So if you're developing any measurement and then produce the metrics, you can just describe what the context is. Some people call that a contextual qualifier. So you say, the context of this was, it was in a medium-sized community, but there were 5 large corporations there. There was ineffective economic development agency. I mean, just really what is the surrounding context in which this measurement was being produced. And give you an example from work I've done in commercializing technology, which is important for some communities that may have a research university there, and they can create spin-off companies from that. But a lot of people developing spin-off companies from a university don't take the time to first check what other competing products or services might be out there. And there are many cases of people doing a lot of work and a lot of effort and spending time and money, and their product or the service is actually already there. They just didn't find it. They think it's unique, but it wasn't. So looking in the context can save an awful lot of grief.
That's an awareness. I think that's also the unique role of ecosystem builders, right? So we are usually the people that are looking on a wider level around, and but we're only as good as the lens that we're familiar with. And I had a friend of mine, we were talking about how to connect, so more about connected networks and how we can work together to maybe use technology to connect people better or have more awareness. And he said it's actually more of a people problem, not an AI solution or anything, because they just don't communicate. Like, there's not a thing where Meetup and Slack and Facebook and like everything doesn't work together. It's proprietary information. So unless you have knowledge of this particular resource, then you won't know what's going on. So it's a people bandwidth problem, not a technology bandwidth solution.
Yeah, I would agree. And the technology then can support people getting together, but without the people getting together, then it won't work. Agreed.
Yeah. So more convenings, maybe. So okay. What else is there that might be effective? So my ask of all of you is that you read through the 3 briefs that were in the email. I'm going to, as I follow up with this, we're starting to upload these videos to YouTube. So there's an ESHIP Goals YouTube channel that you can watch all the working group calls and get caught up. But I will email you so that everybody who's on the call has each other's email addresses. And of course, you've got the Slack channel to communicate with. If you can look at these 3 things and then see if there's another brief or some other effort that you'd like to work on. Maybe it is trying to come up with the framework for what a research conference looks like, what needs to take place before, what needs to take place during, and then the goal of it. So if that's something of interest to you, if there's something about how we share out information, I think all of this information, all of the data is really good. If we can't figure out how to explain it to people that have no idea what we're talking about, then we fail, right? Because it's like the best kept secret. So I don't know how to do that. One of the things that we've discovered as we do this ecosystem building stuff is that we don't have all the answers. The Kauffman Foundation doesn't have all the answers. Andy is fond of telling us there is no answer room, although Christine and I keep looking for the answer room at the Kauffman Foundation. There really isn't one yet. But you know, he reminds us all the time that all of us have parts of the answers, and it's coming together in groups like this that move us along. So we've asked what the hardest part is. Let me ask you, what do you wish there was, or with the end in mind, what is it, if we were to work back on what success looks like for quantified methods, what is it that we would have that would make talking about data and metrics easier, better, faster, more mindful? So what tool do we need? And I'm going to start with Ben.
Oh, pressure's on. Some of the stuff that's already in place or in process, some of the shared definition, some of the models of how you align, as was noted earlier, the sort of government level, census level data with the sort of individual client level data, models of how that really works that could be applied. And then I think, and this actually comes from some work we're doing around STEM education ecosystem level work, but we're trying to figure that out as it relates to entrepreneurs as well. Models and mechanisms for doing individual client level tracking. Ben Johnson went to organization 1 and organization 2 and organization 6 and got support along the way. And how do you understand how that adds up to entrepreneur success? I think mechanisms that provide ecosystems guidance on how to do that. Those are the things that we really struggle with. So hopefully that's helpful in some way.
Okay. You got to call on somebody, Ben.
Sorry, Eric, you're next in the line on the screen. So how about Eric?
Thank you. So let's see. I'm not sure if I'm going to answer your question appropriately, but I'll say one thing that would be great is if a handful of the major funders in this agreed that they were going to respond to organizations that were using a common set of metrics. I think that's part of sort of a path. But I think once you get the funders aligned, it makes it a lot easier to get the organizations to do work that where the data is can be used and viewed and used by other people. I will hand it off to Meg.
I don't know that I have a good answer for this, but my wheels are turning, so I might have to come back to this. But I think for us here locally, it's some sort of tool that allows to have the depth of research presented, so having some place to go where you can find the actual data component, but also having that information presented in a more layman's terms. So I look at with our partners really having that data to dig into, but having that data at a high level to tell a story with. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think that's something, and I know you talked about that filterable or searchable repository, and how do you sort of have two layers to that so that everyone, whether you're a data geek or not, can have access to that information. And I will go to who hasn't spoken yet. Louisa, you haven't spoken yet.
Perfect. Okay, I will 100% agree with Eric's assertion about the funders. That's actually some feedback that I've gotten from my team and the people who are writing our grants, that they're very, very frustrated because every time we're filling out a new grant, like the age like ranges are different, or yeah, I see you laughing, the income levels that we're working with are different, and they're different than the way that I collect them in my large database. And most of these organizations are not sophisticated enough to track things on the level that like I do. Not to toot my horn or anything, but this is my job. It's the only thing I do, and not every organization has that. So it's very, very frustrating. And I think that the Kauffman Foundation, just the Kauffman Foundation, without even really working a lot with other funders, although that could be helpful, could really be just by saying these are the things that we want to see, like these demographics or these whatever. Just moving forward, and with some maybe guidance around how we even suggest to start measuring them, probably would be a very productive step forward. But if you ask me what I think I would like to see, I would like to see that. I would also love to be able to have some sort of, because we have that identified way of measuring things, to have some sort of platform that ecosystems can use to do it themselves. I think there's this piece of software called Flux that does this with large granting organizations, and the granting organizations actually pay to use it, and the organizations who are looking to receive funds don't have to pay for it, but they can set their metrics up inside of it. It's a difficult way. It's a difficult thing for me sometimes, because I think the only way we're going to have this is somebody's trying to monetize it, and then it becomes less organic. So I think about that a lot. How could we do this in a way that is not prohibitive to organizations? Because we have limited resources. But yeah, that's a long answer to the question. Hassan, you've not spoken yet.
I think actually synthesizing the outcomes of the 3 initiatives, and developing out of that some sort of tool to measure the impact of ecosystem builders. Short answer to I could go on for a long time, but that's in a nutshell. That's what I'm thinking.
We got popcorn.
Okay.
I think he said Alistair because Alistair is the one that's left. Okay.
Not much of a choice. What I would really like to see is a tool that practitioners can use that's relatively easy and will help them to collect the data and be able to apply the metrics. But I think the one criterion has to be, if it's not easy to use, people just won't use it. And also it has to be difficult to game, because again, for things like this, people will always, all of us tend to game them, even if we don't realize we're doing that. So easy to use by practitioners, difficult to game, and something that can be used on an ongoing basis. So you can apply this regularly, and that will affect the data you have to collect each time. So being able to distinguish data that has not changed from data that has changed will be an important part of it. But I think the critical feature is if it's too complicated, it just won't be used.
I think that's a really pertinent point. And of course, as Alistair said before, it's about the conditions, right? So to be able to put those conditions, that lens on the information, because we measure urban and rural and all those things very differently. And so, yes, lots of challenges, lots of interesting work, and thank you for a lot of things to think about. I'm going to follow up with this, and then in the next week or so, if we can take a look. I want to put a hard date on it, but since the briefs are written already, is a week enough for people to chime in? Yes. Okay.
Could we make it a week plus a weekend?
A week plus a weekend. So if we do maybe the 13th of the month, would that work?
Great.
So, okay, and give you a chance to take a look at it. If a conference or something sounds interesting to you, then if you could just put a wish list together. This is what needs to happen before. This is what needs to happen at. Who should be involved and when should they be involved? To Eric's point, you want to bring in the people that are looking for it afterwards. But I think that, or maybe it's asking people ahead of time, what is it that you need to measure for you to assist us in doing what we do? Because I think that one of the things that I found is when people are really geeking out on data, they can go down these rabbit holes because they want to measure lots of things that are very interesting. And what is it they say about a good entrepreneur sells people what they want and not what they need? So if we provide them with what they want, and then we can throw in some of what we think they need, that's always good too. But we've got to have an audience, right? So that goes back to the funder thing. You need to know what the funders will support and how they want to support it, so that we can have a pathway to move to other things. But so all of that, lots of fodder. And to close out, do you have any last word or thought to share, Meg? A word, a thought, something you'd like to share with the rest of us?
I don't think I have anything, but I'm excited, and I'm excited that INBIA is coming up, and it sounds like a few of you all will be here in the Twin Cities.
Got a popcorn.
We're just bad at popcorning, Louisa, but you can go now. I just keep picking.
I'm totally like on top of it. I am very excited to re-listen to this recording so that I can have some ideas for my presentation that I have to make. Well, I very much enjoyed listening to the challenges, and to be able to re-articulate those later, I think will be really helpful for a broader audience. So thank you. Let's go with Alistair.
Yeah, mine's really a question for Cecilia. Will there be an opportunity at the next summit for all these teams to present what they've found out so far, what they've done so far, and have discussions about that?
So we're in the middle of summit planning. I can tell you that the summit will be May 21st to the 23rd. I can tell you that a lot of work is going around convening national resource providers so that we can find out what's out there and what would be supported or is supported. So Christine, my colleague, is very focused on engaging national resource providers. As far as the work is concerned, this work, the top 3 to 5 initiatives per goal, is what we're hoping to be able to share out and present. But as far as the work goes, are you talking about your respective and personal work, or are you talking about work that's done collectively?
No, I'm talking about the collective work of the 5 teams that they will have some sort of a reporting out and chance for people to discuss it to show that the teams are doing real work.
Right. Well, yeah. So that's why the goals that have been raised up, the 1 through, so goal 5.1, 2, and 3 were the ones that were identified not only by the community, by people around Kauffman, by ESHIP champions, to be the things that are top of mind. So yes, and to be able to share out and work on that, that's one of the goals of what we're trying to do, and we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Ben, did that answer your question, Alistair?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, that's our best hope anyway. Ben?
Thank you, everyone, for letting me crash. I'm heartened by the fact that we've got smart folks like yourselves who know this data world seemingly much better than I do, who are putting this together on behalf of the ESHIP community. I was, as Louisa said, excited to kind of digest this a little bit more, because I think there were a lot of good things for us individually, but a lot of good stuff coming together for the ecosystem building community called ESHIP. So thank you very much. And I guess, Hassan, turn over to you.
Yeah, for me, it's just thank you to everybody on the call. I have been on most of the calls, and every time I'm on a call, I'm on a call with some of the most talented people in this field. And it just really gets me, gets my creative mind really activated. So just a thank you to everyone. And I think
That's it.
Okay.
Okay. All right. We will look forward to speaking with you all soon. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great week.
Bye, all.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.